The antique shop bell chimed, a sound that usually signaled a mundane transaction. But today, it heralded the unraveling of a secret hidden for years, a secret that would plunge an unsuspecting woman into a world of intrigue and danger. Melissa, her heart a fractured echo of a love now lost, stepped into the dimly lit store. In her hand, she clutched the exquisite ring, a relic of a broken promise, a shimmering symbol of a past she desperately wanted to leave behind. She sought only to be rid of it, to exchange its painful beauty for a clean break. The jeweler, Mr. Harris, a man whose eyes had witnessed countless stories etched in gold and gemstone, took one look at the ring, and his professional composure shattered. Breath hitched, his eyes widened, and a low, guttural gasp escaped his lips. Time seemed to freeze as he stared, not at Melissa, but at the object in his hand. Cold dread, a premonition of something profoundly unsettling, washed over Melissa. "Wait here," Mr. Harris rasped, his voice a mere whisper, a stark contrast to the usual confident tone. He vanished through a creaking door, the ring disappearing with him into the shadowy depths of the back room. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions, heavy with the weight of the unknown. Melissa, alone at the counter, felt a growing unease. She had always considered the ring beautiful. Yes, a masterpiece of craftsmanship. But special? Never. It had been a gift, a token of affection, nothing more, or so she had believed. The sounds from the back room were muffled, indistinct. Drawers opened and closed, papers rustled, and Mr. Harris muttered to himself, his words a cryptic murmur. What was he doing? What could possibly be so captivating, so astonishing about a piece of jewelry? Her mind raced, conjuring scenarios, each more bizarre than the last. Was it a hidden inscription? A rare gem she had never noticed? Or something far more sinister? "Is everything all right?" Melissa finally called out, her voice trembling slightly. The question hung in the air, a fragile thread in the growing tapestry of mystery. Perhaps she should have gone to a different shop, a less dramatic establishment. Yes, Mr. Harris replied, his voice strained, a thin veil over a deeper turmoil. "I'll be right there. Just checking something." He was doing a poor job of concealing his distress. Melissa could hear it in the tremor of his words, the hurried, almost frantic nature of his movements. He sighed, a sound of resignation mixed with a growing sense of foreboding. This was not going to be a simple transaction. This day, she sensed, was about to take a sharp, unexpected, and potentially dangerous turn. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to amplify the tension. Each shadow in the shop deepened the mystery. Melissa imagined 100 different outcomes, none of them good. She had come seeking closure, a release from the emotional baggage of a failed relationship. Instead, she was being drawn into a vortex of the unknown, a place where the past refused to stay buried. Then, the silence was broken. "Aha! There it is!" Mr. Harris's voice, though still laced with a strange urgency, held a note of triumph. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approached the door, each one a hammer blow to Melissa's already frayed nerves. She braced herself, expecting to finally complete the sale, to exchange the ring for a check and be done with it. Could not have been more wrong. Mr. Harris reappeared, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. In his hand he held not the ring, but a folded piece of paper. It was this seemingly innocuous document that had consumed his attention, that had sent him on his frantic search. Melissa stared, bewildered. What could a piece of paper possibly have to do with her ring? She tried to get a better look, but Mr. Harris clutched it tightly as if it were a priceless artifact, key to a long-lost secret. He slipped it into his pocket, his movements quick, almost furtive. "Miss Melissa," he began, his voice low and serious, the jovial demeanor of a seasoned salesman replaced by a gravitas that chilled her to the bone. "I hope you don't mind, but I have to ask you a personal question." Melissa nodded, her throat tight, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The air in the shop seemed to thicken, to become heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of a history she knew nothing about. "Where did you get this ring?" The question hung in the air, sharp and direct, cutting through the layers of her confusion. Mr. Harris's gaze was intense, unwavering, almost accusatory. It was as if he wasn't just asking about a piece of jewelry, but about her entire life, her very identity. Melissa felt a blush creep up her neck, a mixture of embarrassment and a strange defensiveness. Was it the memory of her ex, the sting of betrayal, or the accusatory tone that colored her cheeks? Couldn't be sure. "My ex-boyfriend gave it to me," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. She explained the breakup, the desire to move on, to sever the ties that bound her to a painful past. "2 years ago." "Very well, I see," Mr. Harris said, stroking his chin, his brow furrowed in deep thought. He seemed to be weighing her words, searching for something hidden beneath the surface. "Do you happen to know where he got this ring?" The question was posed carefully, each word measured, deliberate. Melissa shook her head, a gesture of both ignorance and growing frustration. "I always assumed he bought it at a jewelry store," she said, her voice stronger now, laced with a hint of defiance. "I never thought to ask." "That would be very odd," she added, more to herself than to him. "Why would she interrogate someone about the provenance of a gift?" "Well," Mr. Harris said, his voice hesitant, "I actually need to discuss this with a colleague before I can buy it from you." Paused, his eyes darting nervously around the shop, as if he expected someone to burst through the door at any moment. "They are on their way here right now. It shouldn't take long until they get here. Would you like a cup of coffee or tea while you wait?" Melissa was caught off guard, her mind reeling. This was not the smooth, straightforward transaction she'd anticipated. A second opinion? For a ring? It seemed excessive, unnecessary. But then a flicker of hope ignited within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, this meant the ring was worth more than she had ever imagined. Why else would a jeweler need a colleague to assess its value? Yeah, sure. Why not? She replied, trying to sound nonchalant. But inside, a thrill of anticipation was building. She pictured herself with a sudden windfall, a financial cushion that would allow her to start anew, to rebuild her life on her own terms. The thought was intoxicating. She settled into a chair, the aroma of brewing tea filling the air, her mind already racing with possibilities. She was waiting for Mr. Harris's colleague, a fellow jeweler, a second set of expert eyes. That's what she believed. She had no idea that the reality was far more complex, far more dangerous than she could have ever conceived. She was about to be thrust into a world where a simple piece of jewelry was not just an object of beauty, but a key to a mystery that spanned centuries, a mystery that powerful forces would kill to protect. The next 10 minutes were an interlude, a deceptive calm before the storm. The shop, with its antique display cases and hushed atmosphere, seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of tension that was building. Few customers wandered in, browsed the glittering displays, and left. Their transactions ordinary, their lives untouched by the drama that was about to unfold. Melissa watched them, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. She was on the precipice of something momentous, something that would shatter her perception of reality. Lost in her thoughts, she barely registered the sound of the bell as it chimed again, announcing the arrival of another customer. She didn't bother to look up. She was too engrossed in her daydreams of financial freedom, of a future unburdened by the past. That was her first mistake. That was the moment when her world began to tilt on its axis. "Thank you so much for coming right away," she heard Mr. Harris say, his voice tight with a nervous energy that sent a shiver down her spine. "That's her right there," he gestured, his hand pointing directly at Melissa. Melissa finally looked up, her eyes widened in disbelief. Standing in the doorway, his uniform crisp and imposing, was a police officer, not a fellow jeweler, but a guardian of the law. "Ma'am, I'm afraid you have to come to the station with me," the officer said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Melissa's carefully constructed world began to crumble. "What? Me? Why? I haven't done anything!" she exclaimed, her voice rising in panic. This had to be a mistake. A terrible, inexplicable error. She had never been in trouble in her life. She was a law-abiding citizen, a responsible adult. What possible reason could the police have for wanting to take her into custody? The officer remained impassive, unmoved by her protests. "Please follow me to the car," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Melissa scoffed, a sound of disbelief and outrage. "I don't even know what this is about. At least tell me why. What do you think I've done? I've never been arrested for anything in my life." Her mind raced, searching for an explanation, any explanation that would make sense of this nightmare. "Well, not in the way you would think," the officer said, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. "Ma'am, you can cooperate, or I will have to force you to come with me." Threat hung in the air, cold and undeniable. Melissa realized with a sickening lurch of her stomach that this was not a misunderstanding. This was real. This was serious. She had no choice. "And for clarification," the officer added, his voice slightly softening, "I am not arresting you yet. I'm just taking you to the station to ask you some questions. You can prove you haven't done anything wrong, we will let you go, but you're going to have to convince us if you want that to happen." Melissa's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of fear, humiliation, and a growing sense of injustice. She felt exposed, vulnerable. People were staring at her from the street, their faces a blur of curiosity and judgment. They probably thought she was a criminal, a thief. She wiped her tears, trying to regain her composure, but it was a losing battle. She had no idea what was happening, and the unknown was tearing her apart. "We're here," the officer said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. He turned off the car engine. Melissa looked out the window. The imposing brick facade of the police station loomed before her, a stark symbol of authority, a place she had never imagined she would see from the inside of a squad car. The officer got out of the car and opened the door for her. "Follow me," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Melissa obeyed, her legs feeling like lead. She walked past the stern-faced officers, the bustling activity of the station, a chaotic backdrop to her personal nightmare. She was led down a long, dimly lit hallway, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the walls. The air smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, a smell of bureaucracy and confinement. "Wait here," the officer said, his voice echoing in the narrow corridor. He opened a door, revealing a small, windowless room, bare except for a metal table and 2 chairs. He closed the door behind her, leaving her alone, isolated and utterly terrified. Melissa looked around the interrogation room, her heart pounding in her chest. She was a law-abiding citizen. She followed the rules, paid her taxes, and had never even gotten a parking ticket. What could she possibly have done to warrant this? Couldn't think of anything. Any reason why she should be sitting in this cold, sterile room, waiting to be interrogated like a common criminal. But she didn't have much time to dwell on the injustice of it all. The door opened again, and the officer from before entered, this time accompanied by another man in a police uniform. "Hi, Melissa," the man said, his voice calm and professional. "I'm Officer Davis. I see you've already met my colleague, Officer Johnson. Now I want you to tell us about that ring." Officer Davis had no idea that his colleague had never properly introduced himself to Melissa, but that wasn't important right now. What really shook Melissa was the last thing the officer said. The ring. So that's what this is all about, she thought. That stupid, beautiful, cursed ring. "The ring?" Melissa asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and a growing sense of dread. "What about the ring? I told Mr. Harris everything already," she said, her hands clenching into fists. "Well, we want you to tell it again," Officer Davis said, his eyes fixed on her, searching for any sign of deception. "But this time, to us. Where did you get it? This was insane. This was Kafkaesque." The police were interrogating her about a piece of jewelry. It made no sense. It was absurd, and yet here she was, trapped in this room, her life suddenly spiraling out of control. "Well, my ex-boyfriend gave it to me," she said, her voice rising in frustration, "right before he cheated on me with my best friend. I still haven't forgiven either of them for it, and to be honest, I don't think I ever will." All right, we get it," one of the officers interrupted, by his voice impatient. "Did he give it to you? Do you know where he bought it?" Melissa shook her head, her eyes pleading with them to understand her innocence. "No, I have no idea. He never told me, and I never cared enough to ask. Can someone please tell me what is going on? I don't even want that stupid ring anymore." Officer Davis took a deep breath, exchanging a look with Officer Johnson before turning his attention back to Melissa. "We understand this is confusing, and we owe you an explanation," he began, his voice measured, careful. "The ring you possess isn't just any ordinary piece of jewelry." Melissa leaned forward, her anxiety evident, her eyes darting between the 2 officers. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Officer Johnson took over. "That ring, Melissa, is an artifact with deep historical roots. It's not just valuable because of the gems or the metal, but because of its history." Melissa's eyes widened in surprise. An artifact? This was getting stranger and stranger. "It's been passed down through generations," Officer Johnson continued, his voice low and serious, "representing a lineage of power and wealth. Its monetary value is immense, but its historical significance is even greater." "The reason we're involved," Officer Davis interjected, "is that this ring was reported stolen from the Metropolitan Museum 2 years ago. It was part of a temporary exhibit showcasing royal artifacts." Melissa's heart raced, her mind struggling to process the information. Stolen? From a museum? How could that be possible? How had it ended up in her possession? "Stolen," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "But how did it end up with me?" The officers exchanged a glance, realizing the depth of her confusion, the genuine shock in her eyes. "Mr. Harris, the jeweler you visited, has a keen interest in historical artifacts," Officer Johnson explained. "He remembered reading about the theft in a trade magazine. When you presented the ring to him, he recognized it immediately." Melissa felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. So, that's why he had acted so strangely. That's why he had called the police. "So, he called you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Officer Davis nodded. Yes, but let me be clear. We don't believe you had any part in the theft. Your reactions, your genuine confusion, it all points to your innocence. He paused, letting the words sink in, offering a small measure of comfort in the midst of the chaos. However, we need to find out how this ring ended up in your possession. It's crucial to solve this mystery and bring the real culprits to justice. Melissa nodded, her mind racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. She was determined to help in any way she could. As the officers continued explaining the ring's significance, a memory flashed in Melissa's mind, a memory she had dismissed, details she had overlooked. She remembered Steve's odd reaction when she'd once asked about the ring's origin, his evasiveness, the way he'd quickly changed the subject, his discomfort. At the time, she had chalked it up to his general reticence about personal matters. Now, it all began to make sense. Could Steve be involved? Could the man she had loved, the man she had trusted, be a thief? The thought was almost too much to bear. I think Steve knows more than he ever let on, she said, her voice trembling, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and a growing sense of betrayal. He might be our only lead to uncover the truth behind the ring's journey. The officers exchanged glances, recognizing the gravity of her statement. If Steve was involved, this case had just become a whole lot more complicated. If Steve is involved, we need to approach this carefully, Officer Davis murmured, his brow furrowed in thought. We need a confession, something concrete. What if we set up a meeting? Officer Johnson suggested, his eyes gleaming with a strategic intensity. Wire Melissa, get her to talk to Steve and see if he spills anything. Officer Davis pondered the idea, weighing the risks and the potential rewards. It was dangerous, putting Melissa in the line of fire, but it might be their best shot at getting the answers they needed. Melissa felt a whirlwind of emotions. The thought of facing Steve, especially under these circumstances, was daunting, terrifying even. But she knew the importance of the situation. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. Taking a deep breath, she nodded, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her heart. I'll do it, she said, her eyes meeting theirs with a newfound determination. But we need to ensure everything goes smoothly. I won't be bait without a plan. Officers nodded in agreement, appreciating her bravery and her willingness to help. They understood the risks involved, and they were committed to protecting her every step of the way. Officer Davis cleared his throat, his face grave. Melissa, you need to understand the risks involved. If Steve is indeed connected to the theft, he might become defensive or even aggressive. We don't know what he's capable of. Melissa swallowed hard, realizing the gravity of the situation. She was about to enter a world of deception and danger. A world where the man she thought she knew could be a stranger. Criminal. We'll be monitoring every second, ready to intervene, Officer Johnson added, trying to offer some reassurance. But you'll be walking a tightrope, Melissa. You need to be careful, stay focused, and trust your instincts. In a dimly lit room filled with the hum of electronic equipment, Melissa was introduced to the tools of her unexpected mission. Technician, his face impassive, carefully fitted her with a concealed microphone and an earpiece, ensuring they were discreet yet functional. You'll be able to hear us, and we'll hear everything you and Steve discuss, the technician explained, his voice low and professional. We'll be listening every second. Melissa nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and fear, a strange cocktail of emotions that both thrilled and terrified her. Officer Davis played the role of Steve, running through potential conversation scenarios, preparing her for the encounter. Remember, stay calm and stick to the script, he advised, his eyes filled with concern. Try to steer the conversation towards the ring, its origins, how he acquired it. Don't let him suspect anything. Melissa repeated her lines, trying to sound as natural as possible, to recapture the ease and intimacy she once shared with Steve. They went over various responses, anticipating different outcomes, preparing her for any eventuality. Alone for a moment, Melissa's mind raced, a torrent of memories flooding back. The good times, the laughter, the shared dreams, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the lies. She felt a pang of sadness, a wave of anger, and a deep, gnawing apprehension. Could she really do this? Could she face Steve, knowing what he might have done? Knowing that their entire relationship might have been built on a foundation of deceit? Taking deep breaths, she tried to center herself, focus on the task at hand, to remind herself of the importance of her mission. This wasn't about her feelings. This was about justice. This was about uncovering the truth. The officers gathered around Melissa, maps and communication devices spread out on the table. The room buzzed with a quiet intensity, a sense of purpose and determination. We'll have officers stationed outside and inside the venue, Officer Johnson detailed, his voice low and urgent. We'll have a clear view of your table, and all exits will be covered. At the first sign of trouble, we'll move in. Officer Davis added, his eyes meeting Melissa's, his expression a mixture of concern and confidence. Trust your instincts, Melissa. You're stronger than you think. And remember, we've got your back every step of the way. Melissa nodded, taking one last deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation that lay ahead. She was about to step into the past, to confront the man she once loved, and to unravel a mystery that would change her life forever. Trembling fingers, Melissa typed out a message to Steve, her heart pounding with each keystroke. Hey, it's been a while. Fancy catching up over a drink? She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the send button, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Then, with a deep breath, she hit send. The message was out, a digital flare sent into the darkness. A signal would set in motion a chain of events that would expose the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The ball was now in Steve's court. It didn't take long. Almost immediately, her phone buzzed with a new message. Mel, I've been thinking about you. Would love to catch up. When and where? Melissa could sense Steve's eagerness, his enthusiasm, even through the cold, impersonal medium of text. It was clear he was eager, maybe even hopeful about their reunion. A wave of nausea washed over her. How could he be so normal? So untouched by what he had done? Or was he simply a master of deception? Melissa pondered for a moment, her mind racing, searching for the perfect location, the perfect setting for their meeting. She needed somewhere familiar, somewhere they had shared memories, somewhere that would put Steve at ease, perhaps even lower his guard. Al's 8 p.m., she typed, her fingers steady despite the turmoil within. The bar held significance for them. It was where they had celebrated anniversaries, shared countless dates, and forged the bonds of their relationship. It would be the perfect stage for their final act. As the hours ticked by, Melissa's anxiety grew. She practiced her lines, went over the plan with the officers, and tried to anticipate Steve's reactions, his potential defenses, his possible lies. She changed her outfit multiple times, aiming for the perfect balance of casual and put together, wanting to appear both desirable and vulnerable, a target for his confessions. Every time she thought of the impending confrontation, her heart raced, her palms grew sweaty, and a knot of fear tightened in her stomach. She had to stay calm. She had to stay focused. She had to remember what was at stake. Unbeknownst to the regular patrons of Al's, the bar had some additional unseen visitors that evening. Officers Davis and Johnson, along with a few undercover colleagues, discreetly took positions around the bar, their eyes scanning the room, their senses heightened, their presence invisible yet all-encompassing. They had a clear view of Melissa's table, a strategic vantage point that allowed them to monitor every word, every gesture, every nuance of the conversation. They ensured all exits were covered, all escape routes blocked. They were ready, waiting for the scene to unfold, for the truth to be revealed. The dim lighting of Al's cast a nostalgic glow, softening the edges of the familiar surroundings. As Melissa entered, her eyes scanned the room, searching for Steve. She spotted him at the bar, his back to her, his posture radiating a nervous energy. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of the situation seemed to fade, replaced by a ghost of the past, a flicker of the connection they once shared. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over Melissa. A pang of longing, a surge of anger, and a deep-seated sadness for what might have been. They hugged, a brief, awkward embrace that spoke volumes about the distance that had grown between them. Steve's familiar scent, a mix of cologne and something uniquely his own, brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad. Bittersweet reminder of a love now tainted. Been too long, Steve remarked, his voice tinged with a genuine warmth that sent a shiver down Melissa's spine. Was it real, or was it a carefully crafted facade? Melissa smiled, her heart pounding, not from affection but from the gravity of her mission, the weight of the deception she was about to perpetrate. It really has, she replied, her voice steady, her eyes searching his for any hint of guilt, any flicker of remorse. They chatted, the conversation flowing with an almost eerie ease. They talked about work, friends, and the latest movies, their banter punctuated by moments of laughter and shared memories. Melissa played her part, the interested ex-girlfriend, the woman who might still be open to reconciliation. In their covert positions, officers Davis and Johnson listened to every word, their ears attuned to the subtle undercurrents of the conversation. The earpiece relayed the exchange with crystal clarity, every pause, every inflection analyzed for its significance. They exchanged glances, their faces grim, waiting for the moment when the conversation would shift, when the truth would begin to emerge. As the evening wore on, Melissa began to artfully steer the conversation, subtly guiding Steve toward the topic they were most interested in. "Remember the gifts we used to give each other?" she said, her voice casual, her eyes fixed on his. "Like that beautiful ring you gave me. I always cherished that." Steve's eyes flickered briefly, a flicker of unease, a hint of guilt. But he quickly recovered, his smile returning, his voice smooth. "Ah, yes, that was a special one," he responded, his gaze unwavering. Melissa probed further, her voice soft yet persistent. "Where did you find such a unique piece? It was so different from anything I'd ever seen." The ambience of the bar, the familiarity of their banter, and perhaps the drinks they had shared had begun to loosen Steve's tongue, to lower his guard. He leaned in closer, a hint of the old intimacy returning, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's a long story," he began, a shadow crossing his face, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He seemed to be wrestling with himself, torn between revealing the truth and keeping his secret buried. Melissa's heart raced, her senses heightened, knowing she was on the brink of uncovering the truth, of finally understanding the mystery that had brought them to this moment. The atmosphere in the bar thickened, the air crackling with unspoken tension. Taking a deep breath, Melissa finally spoke, her voice soft yet firm, her eyes searching his with an intensity that belied her outward calm. "Steve," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I've always wondered, where did you really get that ring?" Steve's face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks. He took a long, deliberate sip of his drink, swirling the liquid in the glass, buying himself time, searching for the right words, the right lie. "Melissa," he began, his voice shaky, a tremor running through his words. "Not as simple as just buying it from a store." Paused, his eyes darting around the bar, as if expecting someone to be listening, someone to expose his secret. He seemed to be wrestling with himself, torn between the need to confess and the instinct to protect himself. Taking a deep breath, Steve finally spoke, the words tumbling out in a rush, a torrent of guilt and regret. "I didn't buy it. I took it," he confessed, his voice barely audible above the murmur of the bar. His eyes met Melissa's, filled with a mixture of shame and desperation. "It was a mistake, a moment of madness. I thought it would impress you, show you how much I cared." He looked down, waiting for her reaction, bracing himself for the inevitable condemnation. But before Melissa could respond, before she could process the shock of his confession, the carefully constructed calm of Al's was shattered. The doors of the bar burst open with a loud bang, a sound that echoed through the room, causing other patrons to turn in shock, their conversations abruptly silenced. Shadows of multiple figures loomed at the entrance, their intentions clear, that their presence radiating an aura of authority and purpose. Officers, badges gleaming under the dim lights, swiftly moved through the bar, their movements precise and coordinated. In mere seconds they surrounded Steve, their faces grim, their voices authoritative. Steve looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief, his face a mask of shock. "Steve Thompson, you're under arrest," Officer Davis declared, his voice firm and unwavering. He reached for his handcuffs, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence of the bar. The bar erupted in murmurs and gasps, a wave of shock rippling through the crowd. Steve, still reeling from Melissa's question and his own confession, was led away, his protests fading into the night. The gravity of his words, the weight of his actions, finally crashed down upon him. He had confessed, not to a lover, but to a witness, a pawn in a game far larger and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. "That wasn't a confession," Steve stammered, his voice quivering, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape, a way out of this nightmare. "I was just talking. You can't just arrest me based on a conversation." Officer Johnson, his expression stern, his eyes filled with cold, unwavering certainty, produced a small playback device, a silent witness to Steve's downfall. "Your words, Steve," he said, his voice calm yet firm, pressing play. The room filled with Steve's voice, his confession echoing through the bar, detailing the theft of the ring, the moment of madness that had led him down this path of destruction. Alongside the recording, photographs of the stolen ring, matched with meticulous museum documentation, were laid out on a nearby table. Undeniable evidence painting a clear picture of Steve's guilt, leaving him cornered, exposed, and utterly overwhelmed. The weight of his actions bore down on Steve, crushing him under its immense pressure. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his shoulders sagging in defeat, his eyes filled with a profound regret. Okay, he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible. I did it. I took the ring. He looked up at Melissa, his gaze pleading, searching for a flicker of understanding, a hint of forgiveness. But he was met with a gaze of disappointment, of hurt, of a profound sadness that cut him to the core. Melissa stood at a distance, her heart heavy, her mind reeling from the whirlwind of events. A storm of emotions raged within her. Relief that the truth had finally surfaced, anger at Steve's audacity and betrayal, and a deep-seated sadness for the love they had once shared. A love now shattered beyond repair. She had yearned for closure, for an end to the uncertainty that had haunted her since the breakup. But the unfolding events, the revelation of Steve's crime, brought a complexity of feelings she hadn't anticipated, a tangle of emotions that left her feeling raw and vulnerable. Flashing lights of the police car cast a blue and red hue on the bar's exterior, a stark reminder of the harsh reality that had intruded upon their lives. Officers guided Steve, now handcuffed and subdued, towards the vehicle, his head bowed in shame, his future uncertain. As the car's door slammed shut, sealing Steve's fate, Melissa watched from the bar's entrance, her eyes fixed on the departing vehicle. Sight of him, once her love, now a criminal being taken away, was a poignant reminder of the unpredictable turns life could take, the fragility of trust, and the devastating consequences of betrayal. Inside the stark, cold interrogation room at the police station, Steve sat across from Officers Davis and Johnson, the overhead light casting a harsh glow, emphasizing the lines of stress and exhaustion on his face. He looked older, defeated, a shadow of the man Melissa thought she knew. It was years ago, he began, his voice barely a whisper, a confession born of despair and the crushing weight of his guilt. I thought the ring would be my ticket to a better life, a way to prove myself, to show Melissa how much I cared. He detailed the planning, the execution, and the aftermath of the theft, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, as if he were recounting a story about someone else. The room seemed to blur as Steve's words transported them back in time, to the night he had crossed the line, the night he had made the choice that would forever alter the course of his life. He remembered the museum, grand and imposing, silent and still in the dead of night. Steve, equipped with tools and driven by a desperate ambition, had bypassed the security systems with surprising skill, his movements swift and precise. He had been meticulous, careful, confident that he could pull off the heist without a trace. He remembered the thrill, the adrenaline rush, the almost intoxicating sense of power as he held the ring in his hand, its cold, smooth surface gleaming under the dim light of his flashlight. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of centuries of history, a relic of a bygone era, a tangible link to a world of kings and queens, of power and intrigue. He had imagined presenting it to Melissa, her eyes widening in awe, her heart melting at his grand gesture. He had thought it would solidify their bond, elevate their relationship to a level of passion and devotion he had only dreamed of. But back in the present, Steve's eyes glistened with unshed tears, his voice choked with emotion. I never imagined the weight this ring would carry, he admitted, his gaze fixed on the cold metal table in front of him. It wasn't just about the money or impressing Melissa. It became a chain, a constant reminder of the wrong I'd done, the life I'd stolen. He looked down, his shoulders slumped in defeat, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his actions and their far-reaching repercussions. He had thought he could control the situation, that he could use the ring to his advantage and then return it unscathed. He had been wrong. So wrong. Melissa, in another room, waited, her emotions a complex mix of sadness, anger, and a strange sense of closure. She recounted her side of the story, her voice firm yet tinged with a lingering sadness. She spoke of the gift, her ignorance of its true origin, and the gradual, horrifying realization of Steve's crime. I never suspected, she said, her eyes meeting Officer Davis's with a steady gaze. I trusted him. I loved him. And he betrayed me in the worst possible way. Her statement, combined with the overwhelming evidence, would be instrumental in ensuring Steve faced the consequences of his actions, ensuring that justice would be served. The wheels of the legal system were turning, grinding inexorably toward a conclusion. After the whirlwind of events, the arrests, the interrogations, the shocking revelations, Melissa found herself back at the jewelry store, the place where the mystery had begun. Mr. Harris, the jeweler who had recognized the stolen ring and set the entire chain of events in motion, greeted her with a warm smile, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and respect. I've been in this business for decades, he said, his voice soft, his gaze steady, and that ring story was well known in our circles. a legend whispered among collectors and historians. Thank you, Melissa, for playing such a pivotal role in bringing closure to this long-standing mystery. His words were a balm to her wounded soul, a validation of her courage and her willingness to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She had been thrust into a world of intrigue and danger. She had emerged, battered but not broken, with a newfound strength and resilience. The grand hall of the museum was abuzz with activity. Museum officials, along with a small crowd of reporters and curious onlookers, gathered to express their gratitude to Melissa, the woman who had helped recover a priceless piece of history. The museum's director, a distinguished man with a kind smile and a warm handshake, approached Melissa, his eyes filled with genuine appreciation. "Your actions have helped recover a piece of history that was thought lost forever," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "This ring is more than just a beautiful object. It's a symbol of our past, a connection to our heritage." Beside him, Officers Davis and Johnson nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting a sense of pride and satisfaction. They had solved a complex and challenging case, brought a criminal to justice, and recovered a priceless artifact, all thanks to the courage and cooperation of an ordinary woman who had been thrust into extraordinary circumstances. The director went on to explain the ring's significance, its long and storied past. This ring dates back centuries, belonging to a renowned monarch, a powerful ruler who shaped the destiny of nations, he said, his voice filled with reverence. It symbolizes a pivotal treaty, a fragile agreement that ended decades of conflict and ushered in an era of peace and prosperity. As he spoke, Melissa realized the full gravity of Steve's theft, the true value of what he had taken. The ring wasn't just valuable in monetary terms. It held a deep historical and cultural significance, a weight that transcended its material worth. News of the ring's recovery spread like wildfire, capturing the attention of the city, the nation, and even the world. Local newspapers and television stations clamored for interviews with Melissa, eager to hear her story, to understand the events that had led her to the center of this incredible drama. Headlines praised her bravery and integrity, hailing her as a local hero. "Local heroine assists in recovering stolen artifact," one headline read, while another proclaimed, "Woman's ex-boyfriend arrested in museum heist." Melissa, though overwhelmed by the attention, felt a sense of quiet pride in her role in the unfolding drama. She had faced her fears, confronted her past, and helped bring a measure of justice to a situation that had seemed hopeless. The courtroom was packed as Steve's trial concluded. Evidence against him, especially his own confession, was irrefutable. His lawyer, a seasoned professional, mounted a valiant defense, arguing that Steve had acted out of desperation, driven by a misguided desire to impress the woman he loved. But the jury was unmoved. They saw the evidence, they heard the recording of his confession, and they understood the gravity of his crime. The judge, after hearing all the testimonies and reviewing the evidence, delivered the verdict. Steve was found guilty of theft, a felony that carried a significant prison sentence. He was sentenced to several years behind bars, punishment that reflected the severity of his crime and the profound impact it had had on the community and the museum. As he was led away, his face etched with regret and despair, a sense of finality settled over the room. The chapter was closed. The ring had been returned to its rightful place, and Steve had faced the consequences of his actions. The town felt a collective sense of relief and closure. The mystery of the stolen ring, which had captivated and troubled them for so long, was finally resolved. The museum saw an influx of visitors, eager to view the now famous artifact, to marvel at its beauty, and to learn its incredible story. The story of the ring, the theft, and the woman who helped recover it served as a powerful reminder of the importance of preserving history, the enduring power of truth, and the vital role the community plays in upholding justice and protecting its cultural heritage. Media frenzy eventually subsided, the cameras moved on to other stories, and the town's chatter about the ring theft began to wane. Life slowly returned to normal, the rhythm of daily existence resuming its familiar cadence. Melissa, however, found it challenging to return to her everyday life. The events of the past few weeks had changed her, leaving an indelible mark on her soul. Everywhere she went, she was recognized, pointed at, whispered about. She was the woman tied to the museum heist, a label she both embraced and resented. Coffee runs and grocery shopping became a series of nods and whispers, a constant reminder of the extraordinary events that had thrust her into the spotlight. "Isn't that the girl whose ex-boyfriend stole the museum ring?" they would say, their voices a mixture of curiosity and awe. Quiet moments at home, once a sanctuary of peace and solitude, gave Melissa time to reflect on the ordeal, process the complex emotions that still lingered within her. The entire experience had been a crash course in trust and betrayal, a harsh lesson in the fragility of relationships and the deceptive nature of appearances. He realized that ignoring red flags, especially in romantic relationships, could lead to unforeseen and potentially dangerous consequences. He had seen the signs, the inconsistencies in Steve's stories, the evasiveness in his answers, but she had dismissed them, choosing to believe in the man she wanted him to be, rather than the man he truly was. Trust your gut, she would often tell herself, her voice firm, her resolve strengthened by the lessons she had learned. She thought back to the times she had felt that something was off with Steve, a nagging unease that she had brushed aside, attributing it to her own insecurities or a lack of trust. She vowed never to make that mistake again. Determined not to let the past define her, not to allow the trauma of the experience to overshadow her future, Melissa made a conscious decision to move forward, to rebuild her life on a foundation of self-reliance and emotional honesty. She began attending therapy, a process that helped her process her feelings about Steve's betrayal, the media's relentless attention, and the lingering fear that she had been so easily deceived. She learned to forgive herself for her naivete, to accept that she was not responsible for Steve's actions, and to focus on healing her own wounds. Slowly, painstakingly, she rebuilt her life, brick by brick, focusing on her own well-being and happiness, leaving the shadows of the past behind, embracing her newfound freedom with cautious optimism. She reconnected with old friends, the ones who had stood by her during the ordeal, offering unwavering support and a listening ear. She rediscovered her passions, the hobbies and activities that had once brought her joy and fulfillment. Embracing her single life, Melissa took up activities she had always wanted to try but had never had the time or courage to pursue. She joined a dance class, her body moving to the rhythm of the music, her spirit soaring with each step. She traveled solo to places she had only dreamed of visiting, exploring new cultures, meeting new people, and discovering hidden strengths she never knew she possessed. She even started a small online business, turning her passion for art into a source of income and creative expression. Her life, once defined by her relationship with Steve, became an adventure, a journey of self-discovery filled with new experiences and unexpected joys. Each day was a step away from the drama, a stride toward self-discovery, a testament to her resilience and her unwavering determination to create a brighter future for herself. She learned to embrace her independence, to cherish her own company, and to find happiness within herself, rather than relying on someone else to complete her. As days turned into months, Melissa's optimism grew, her confidence blossomed, and her spirit soared. She had weathered a storm, a tempest that had threatened to destroy her, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured than ever before. Ring, the theft, and Steve became chapters in her past, painful lessons that had shaped her but did not define her. She carried the scars, the reminders of the pain she had endured, but they no longer held her captive. They were a part of her story, a testament to her strength and her ability to overcome adversity. Looking ahead, Melissa felt a surge of excitement, a sense of anticipation for the future that lay before her. The future was a blank canvas, and she held the brush, ready to paint her own masterpiece, to create a life filled with joy, purpose, and love on her own terms. And as a final note, if you or anyone you know has been affected by a similar experience, there are resources available to help. You can find support and information by searching online for support resources. Remember, you're not alone, and help is available.